the so-called congestion pricing plan.
The new Baltimore Red Line will run on light rail transit.
We truly will connect our communities and supercharge our recovery.
Buses, ferries, rails, and trains, public transportation helps connect our cities. However, many of the most well-known systems have been characterized by disruptions, delays, and a lack of safety. With public transit announcements happening across the country, these changes and plans for improvement beg the question, can we really improve public transportation? And if so, how? After the pandemic, public transportation ridership was hit hard. As people stopped going to work and school, the roads and mass transit systems cleared out. Now, with a large portion of riders lost in the shift to hybrid work, public transportation is still seeing the effects.
Systems that carried lots of people into those big job centers now are struggling to get those passengers back, because even if they start riding again, they're riding 2 days a week instead of 5 days a week. They're also more likely to drive in because if they're only going in 1 or 2 days a week, they might be willing to pay for parking and forego transit altogether.
Americans' usage and reliance on cars dates decades before the pandemic. Within the history of the U.S. automobile industry lies an explanation to the current state of our public transportation.
The United States was a pioneer in mass production of automobiles, but what was paired to the mass production of automobiles in the United States was a complete abandonment of what was then private mass transit industry. It wasn't until the 1960s and 70s that the government in most American cities got involved in the transit business. And by then, most transit companies had gone bankrupt.
As cities expanded and modernized, car usage became the priority.
We have underwritten the cost of driving. So then we say, gosh, we've built lots of wide streets and we've built freeways and we've made sure there's plenty of free parking at every destination. Why are people driving so much? There's a lot of advantages for the individual traveler, but when everybody starts using it at the same time, that's when problems result. Public transit is really good at moving a lot of people in the same direction at the same time.
Now, cities are seeking to modernize their systems and routes to not only improve efficiency, but to gain riders back from the pandemic.
We have Route 91 is running like it did in 1859, but folks have moved. And not just after the pandemic, people live in different places, they want to travel to different places. We can sort of reboot this network to be where folks want to get now, as opposed to where they used to want to go.
Boston just extended a pilot program offering free bus rides on 3 lines. COVID relief funds from the state of Massachusetts finance these rides. But a project like this brings up the important question, where does funding come from to improve public transportation? Baltimore just announced a new light rail project that is partially funded by the Department of Transportation's Rail Vehicle Replacement Program.
Transportation officials estimate the system will cost anywhere between $3 to $7 billion.
The state of Maryland is also providing $90 million in matching funds and allocating $127.6 million in federal funds.
There is a saying in the transit industry is that once you've seen one transit agency's budget, you've seen one transit agency's budget.
This project and many others demonstrate that funding can come from an amalgam of sources, like taxes, grants, and a mix of local, state, and federal funds. But without a clear source, this can leave local governments to get creative when finding the means for transit improvement, such as congestion tolls in New York City that would have had drivers paying $15 to get into parts of Manhattan and raised billions for the MTA. But the governor nixed it just weeks before it was set to go into effect.
It really is sort of unusual for a government operation to have such varied sources of funding.
When improving transportation, funding is used to pay the workers and buy the materials in order to provide maintenance, build new routes, and modernize service. But before it can do that, other factors come into play. In LA, for example, where they have the largest transportation development program in the US, politics pose an issue in deciding where stations go to appease higher income taxpayers. Generally speaking, some politicians are more pro-transit than others, which means the success of initiatives that fund and improve transit can be impacted by who's in office. But LA is also an example of how the money can come and yet riders don't. Safety remains a large concern for potential riders.
One of the things that happened in the pandemic is there were suddenly a lot fewer riders on systems. And as a result, there was a feeling of less safety during the pandemic. There were a lot of homeless people riding on mass transit that made people feel uncomfortable. Transit isn't isolated from society's larger problems. If you don't have a shelter system that can accommodate people, people will use anything they can find. And many American transit operators are now investing in greater public safety.
But just like how the problems of society intersect with public transportation, so do the benefits.
We know that when we invest in service, not only do riders take the system, we have less cars on the road, less congestion, better air quality, and we can attract businesses.
Public transportation can connect people from their homes to schools, services, and places of work, which means more jobs, more business, and economic growth. And with less cars on the road, it can help to reduce our carbon footprint. So what does the future of public transportation look like? That will depend on how we continue to build our cities, where we put our dollars, and the attitudes riders and voters have about transit.
Maybe even before we build the transit, we have to rebuild the values in American society that says it's not okay that just because you live in this particular neighborhood or suburb, that your transportation commute takes 2 hours instead of 25 minutes or a half an hour. That's not acceptable in a modern industrialized society.
One thing is for certain, for public transportation to improve, it will need support in dollars, votes, and of course, riders.